I feel as though Lake Mungo is the quintessential example of less is more. It is a horror movie. I think it's fair to put it under that umbrella, but it commits so heavily to its documentary aesthetic that of any horror movie I've ever watched, this one feels the most like it could be an actual documentary. A lot of that comes from the performances. I'm not terribly familiar with Australian cinema, and so I don't know if anyone featured in this movie is a famous, well-known actor, but they all give such real, honest, heartfelt performances. They just feel like real people. And I've heard critiques of the movie that say that, there's no interesting characters to be invested in. But I feel like that's missing the point because they just feel like regular people on the street. And in the intensity and the emotionality of the performances, you can kind of divine what's going on underneath. I think the best example of that is the performance of the father. While he's probably the least emotional of anyone on screen, you can see that underlying pain in his performance. Talking about why the family still leaves the porch light on, that look in his eyes is heartbreaking. You can see so much that he's not saying, and I don't know. The effectiveness of that performance is really striking to me. And I think all of the performances have that same realism. The story structure of the movie was also incredible. It feels like a pretty bog standard unfolding mystery for a little while, and the slow creep into paranormal has you on edge the whole time. It's very good at building tension, all of those slow, lingering shots of the interior of the empty household. They capture a similar energy that I think Skinamarink does. They kind of put me in mind of being 11 years old when my mom would go out for errands and I would just be in an empty house alone. And I think it captures the energy of what used to be a home and now feels like a casket because one of the family members is dead. And so even before anything explicitly supernatural is shown on camera, you get such a rising sense of tension and unease that it primes you even more for when the actual scary things start happening. And then the twisting and untwisting of the plot. First, it's all this paranormal terror, and then you reveal that it was a hoax. But then through that hoax, you find out that there's even more going on than you first believed. The reveal of the neighbor squatting in the dark is so unsettling. And then it's just such a feeling of disgust and horror, realizing what she went through. The shift from a paranormal horror into a real life horror. Watching the movie, I feel like it's impossible not to go through an entire collection of different emotions. You get sucked in with the curiosity of who might have killed Alice Palmer, and then slow mounting fear as you see her haunting. Then you start to get suspicious about why the brother might have faked it, and then the disgust and the horror seeing what the neighbors did to her. And then the final twist and untwist that she was actually in the images after all. I find the story of the psychic so compelling. It's so refreshing that he isn't a hack, he's not trying to take advantage of the family, but his psychic attunement isn't played up or anything. It's not like overly mystical. It doesn't break your suspension of disbelief at all. The movie's level of self-control and reservedness is another one of its strong suits. And another reason why it's so believable is because nothing happens in it that couldn't be like debunked, I guess, with 10 reasons why this couldn't be real. And giving the final little twist that the psychic had a previous interaction with Alice and he kept it from the family. I love that it isn't, he was lying because he's guilty. At no point did I ever believe that the psychic was involved in her death. Like, yes, he withheld the truth from the family, but he was put in an impossible situation. He feels like a real grounded human character, and I don't blame the family for distancing themselves from him because it's not always black and white. There's not always a bad guy and a good guy. It just sucks. I don't know if it was just me not being as attentive in the earlier part, but I was under the impression that she drowned in Lake Mungo. And so that final build up to the last scare of the movie, the only real jump scare of the movie, showing that Lake Mungo was actually a dry, deserted former lake. Like it's only a lake in name. That felt like a twist in its own right. And it also felt very resonant with the themes of the film from a viewer experience, at least. I'm not sure if it's ever stated at the beginning whether or not what the name of the lake she drowned in was, but it had me feeling like I had misinterpreted her entire story in the same way that her family misinterpreted her story, because none of them ever knew her. And I think that's the whole point of the movie, is that none of them ever knew her in the way that she deserved to be known. I respectfully disagree with the notion that it's a happy ending. I don't think that her ghost in that final image is happily watching over her. And I think that the mother saying near the end that when they went back to the house after visiting Lake Mungo, things were more peaceful. I think that is the family still seeing what they want to see and believing what they want to believe about their daughter. I see Lake Mungo as an incredible tragedy, not just because of what happened to her while she was alive, but even in death, Alice Palmer does not become understood. They see pieces of her life, they get fragments of her suffering, and from it they divine their own interpretations, and maybe they get a deeper understanding of what she was going through, and they learn enough about her to make peace with themselves. But the fact that she's still lingering at the end reads to me as her having unfinished business. And now that they've moved on, she's alone forever, just as she was in life. It's heartbreaking. Equally heartbreaking, I think, is the temporal haunting going on. There's the obvious incredible jump scare of Alice facing her own mortality in a very literal way at Lake Mungo. But seeing the mother and the daughter having visions that coincide with each other, it's so crushing. And it's so metaphorically resonant with the themes of parents not being able to understand their children. They're in the same room having the same spiritual experience. They're so close to each other, but they just can't bridge the gap. It's such incredible filmmaking having those two scenes play out and intercut with each other. And it makes the psychic an even more empathetic character because you know that he understands what happened, but what is he going to say to the mom? That she had the same vision, so you let her down? No, that's something he's going to have to carry with him. And the final incredible thing I want to touch on is that in spite of the fact that this is like a murder documentary with a paranormal twist, we never get closure on who killed Alice Palmer. And I think the answer is pretty clearly given to us. It has to be the brother. He was the last one to see her alive, and then he was the one to point it out. Like, he waited a little bit and then pointed it out, which, you know, maybe trying to cover his own tracks there. If he didn't do anything wrong, why was he covered in bruising inexplicably? Why did he go back to the water wearing her jacket? And all of the archive footage they have of him filming her and him with her, there are some people who argue that there is like an uncomfortable, maybe almost incestuous energy happening. I know there's some interpretations that he was abusing her as well. I don't know if I necessarily buy into the extremity of that, but there is a fair argument to be made for that being the case. I think if we go with the interpretation that he was abusing her as well, it might also explain why she seemingly consented to the relationship with the neighbors. Not to say that she wasn't groomed and abused and taken advantage of, she very much was. But apparently in the tape, it is shown that she consented to what was going on. That was the argument that the neighbors made. So if we go with the interpretation of the brother being an abuser, then that might make more sense of why she was seeking out the closest thing she could see to comfort. But pushing aside the possibility that he might have been abusing her as well, the performance that the actor gives is so incredible. And I think it's fair for people who just read it as a grieving brother who is emotionally stunted, who doesn't know how to cope with the death of maybe one of the only people in his life that he was close to. But I feel like there's enough nuance in the portrayal that, at least when I was watching it, there's no way it wasn't him. I think the most telling scene and one of the most interesting scenes in the context of all the haunting is when her father goes into her room and sees her ghost, and when she notices him, she starts yelling at him to get out. We see that happening. We see the footage of that with the brother. And so I think that that was her ghost reliving trauma of her brother not respecting her personal space and autonomy, and that the dad just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time while she was remembering and reliving. And that makes the whole ending even more horrific because he got away with it. They get to move on to a new happy life. The parents think that they have solved this paranormal crisis. They think that they've laid their daughter to rest just by knowing her better, but they're taking with them the person that killed her, and he gets away with it. But whatever your personal interpretation might be, I think the brilliance of Lake Mungo is that it's so open-ended, but it doesn't feel open-ended in a way that's lazy. I feel like a lot of movies that have open to interpretation endings can be like, I mean, look at Joker. Lake Mungo is just so good, so beautiful, so wonderfully shot, so well written, so well acted. The music is stunning and haunting. I appreciate that her corpse was not like it was scary, and especially at the scene at Lake Mungo, very distressing. That was an incredible jump scare, a very well-earned jump scare. But the bloated corpse could have been like a nightmare show. It just kind of looked realistic. That seems like what a corpse would look like after a week underwater. But I think if I keep going, it'll just be randomly talking about little things I liked, and I don't know. I think I've covered the base of what I want to say here. I think I'll do more of these. It's fun to yap about good art.